The heroic interlude playing through Emily's mind didn't last for long, nor did the cheer from the other divers and security personnel. As the bodies slowly stopped sizzling and the drips of blood from the walkways slackened, the true scale of the carnage came into view as everyone began to catch their breath and look around. Piles of bodies littered all around the walkways, security personnel and divers mixed with cultists, their limbs twisted and bodies broken. Outside the walls, cultists lay in so many mounds it looked as if the tunnel was a sea with bodies as waves. Though corrupted blood ran so thickly, it may have been more fitting to describe the scene as hills with streams. Emily's mind caught up to itself, and she quickly darted past the walls, looking left and right as divers and security personnel groaned or shouted around her.
Marill? Davin?
Emily screamed, her body beginning to shake with genuine fear as the battle lust and victory rush fled her like sweat from skin on a hot day.
Up here,
Davin said with a grunt, and Emily spun around, gasping in shock. Targe was across Davin's shoulders in a fireman's carry, his mouth dripping blood as well as the 3 huge rake marks across his chest. The green skin underneath ripped so carelessly that it reminded Emily of wet paper.
Berserker came through us as well as one of their captains. Targe caught the brunt end,
Davin muttered, quickly staggering down the steps with other divers bearing the heavily wounded.
I still can't find Yoipa.
I can't see her either.
Marill called out from atop her gunnery position, and she was impatiently trotting along the edge of the concrete roof.
Get that fucking lift over here. I need help to carry the wounded. Yo, Pua?
Emily called out, quickly shoving past people as she scrambled to stow away her weapons, even finding her CZ-75 laying idle on the blood-drenched tunnel floor. She scooped it back up, doing a functions check while looking around in alarm.
Yo, Pua, where are you?
Emily's voice fought against the cloud of others, all of whom were calling out for lost comrades, for help, or for someone to come help haul a wounded diver away. The entire area was a flurry of motion as everyone scrambled to start administering medical care, finish off surviving cultists, or drag themselves away from the walls, eyes wide as horrible reality began to spin its tendrils into their minds. Bags of blood were being cast around by the fistful, the corks of healing potions popped and thunked with every second, while others just pressed down with their hands over gunshot or stab wounds, looking around frantically for one of the medics who were running around. After only 5 minutes, every medic was stained in blood up to their elbows. Some pulled out complicated-looking handheld guns that launched staples and painkillers into bodies, while others pulled out mesh bags, quickly stuffing organs into place while pouring a glittering blue liquid over the exposed inner flesh, attempting to coach the organs into healing themselves of their micro-lacerations. The smell of blood, scorched viscera, organs, gun smoke, and shit filled Emily's nose like a fog as she scrambled along the dead, bile rising to her throat. She choked it back down, though, breathing in raggedly as she still looked for Yoipua. Even as Emily dug among the dead, she could see just how many divers and security personnel had died in the melee, their bodies sprinkled in the piles of cultists dead. Emily ripped them aside just as she did the cultists, looking under their bodies for any evidence of Yoipua.
Emily, I can't find her over here.
Marill called out, quickly hopping from side to side on her hooves as she looked around near one of the blasted pieces of walls.
Where was she fighting at?
She was by us.
Davin called out, jogging up to a stretcher truck and pointing over to the left of where Emily was looking. Emily looked up and around, pulling sweat-soaked strands of hair from her lips, and quickly began to trace where Yoipua could have gone in her head. Emily skittered over the bodies, panting heavily as she spotted a loose brown feather stuck to a pylon, coated in already congealing blood mud and dust. Here the bodies were thick and in pieces, having been blown apart or over the wall as one of the larger explosive bundles had ripped a ragged gash in the metallic skin. Emily threw severed arms out of her way as if they were brush, grunting shrilly as she heaved torsos and legs out of her way. The more amble wounded rolled or tumbled down the mounds of bodies, calling out for aid at the nearby frenzy of people.
Yo, Puya? Yo, Puya, can you hear me?
Emily called out, working her way through the piles of bodies. She unearthed a coughing, sputtering cultist, his gnarled fists full of brown feathers, and Emily bristled visibly, even her hair seeming to stand on end.
Where is she?
Emily roared, gripping the minor cultist by his overalls and hauling him towards her, even as he spat and gargled on his own blood.
Where is the harpy?
The cultist chuckled wetly, blood streaming past his chin and cheeks.
It's her. Tasted great.
Emily howled in wordless outrage as she picked up a nearby chunk of concrete, then blasted the cultist over the head. He gurgled out in shock as the concrete shattered his skull, but his body carried on noisily as Emily kept crushing the concrete chunk down again and again onto his face, screaming ferally as she did. His legs and arms jittered, feather-filled hands twitching as Emily turned his brain to paste until finally they stirred no more. Emily spat his blood off of her lips as she tossed the chunk of concrete away, then went back to digging through the bodies, throwing the mush-faced cultist down and away. His body ragdolled all the way down to the tunnel floor, feathers trailing behind him in the air. She hauled a dead security officer away, a large shred of wall having ripped him in two, and almost cried out when she saw Wingclaw clutching an M79 grenade launcher.
Marill, get over here. I found her.
Emily screamed, manically hauling away at the pieces of body, wreckage, and weapons. Marill sprinted over, clambering up to where Emily was, moving bodies aside with ease. They unearthed Yoipua, the harpy's eyes closed and body splayed out clumsily. Her face looked as if it had caught a chunk of shrapnel on her cheek. Her hair was burned, and her body was littered with slash marks made from melee weapons. Worst of all was her left leg, which had been sheared away in tatters just at the mid-thigh. The flesh hung there lamely, the bone broken off in an angled splinter. Mayla's words drifted into her mind like an old nightmare, and Emily wanted to vomit as she heard them.
Dangerous and perilous is their friendship, death always apart in their company.
Oh, my God.
Emily breathed out, bringing her fist to her mouth with a sob as Marill shrunk backwards from the horrible sight.
Oh, no. Oh, Yoipua.
Marill croaked out, her hands held up and confused as to what to do with them. The more Emily looked, the more Emily wanted to scream again. Yoipua must have been in the thick of the fighting, as she had so many lacerations and cuts, it was as if she had tumbled down a slide of razor blades. Marill leaned down, touching Yoipua's blood-covered belly with her fingertips.
Yoipua? You there, girl?
Marill.
Yoipua said weakly, her voice so quiet that Emily and Marill almost missed it over the clamor.
She's alive.
Emily screamed, quickly pulling Yoipua away from the puddle of organs, blood, and bodies she was perched upon.
Marill, she's fucking alive.
Emily.
Yoipua whined, her eyes blinking weakly through the blood in her eyes.
Emily, Yoipua hurt.
I know, baby, I know. Calm down.
Emily panted, smiling despite the tears leaving bloody trails on her face. Emily looked up to Marill.
We gotta get that leg tied off. We don't know how much blood she's lost. She's lost enough to need a replacement. Look how pale she is.
Marill said hurriedly, whipping a combat action tourniquet out of her saddlebags and quickly wrapping it around Yoipua's stump of a leg.
Look at her arm as well.
Emily gently coaxed Yoipua's shattered wing around and let out a sad
oh
as she saw that a lot of Yoipua's upper wing limb had been shorn away right down to the bone.
She needs blood, and she needs blood now.
Marill said in a frantic but professional manner, tugging on the combat action tourniquet deftly. Yoipua let out a little cry, her body jerking faintly. Emily reached down, hushing the harpy while running her hand across Yoipua's blood and dust-covered cheeks soothingly.
Shh. It's gonna be okay. We're gonna get you some blood.
Emily crooned out, moving to get up.
Emily, no.
Yoipua cried out, her pointed teeth bared in pain.
Please, no leave. No leave, Yoipua.
I'll be right back. Marill is right here.
Emily sniffed, wiping at her eyes with her bloody hands.
I'll be right back in a matter of seconds. Don't you worry.
Emily.
Yoipua muled out again, the harpy beginning to cry and shake now.
Emily, cold. Death so cold. Don't leave Yoipua alone.
Emily, go!
Marill barked, shoving at Emily as she started pulling out heat packs and a blanket. Marill reached into another pocket, but when she unzipped it, red liquid and broken pieces of broken crystal bottles tinkled out.
God damn it! Emily, go! Now!
Emily turned her back to the pair and scrambled down the mound of bodies as fast as she could, her heart keening in her chest as she heard Yoipua cry out for her. Emily choked back more cries as she started sprinting as fast as she could towards the main area of mile marker Cola, skidding to a halt as she looked around.
I need blood. Where's the blood?
It's by the CCP.
A diver called out, helping one of the more lightly wounded security personnel to his feet after setting a splint. Emily took off at a sprint again and saw the heavily congested area where it must have been. Emily hopped and jumped over stretchers and the laying wounded with little care. Her eyes locked on the throng of field medics who were quickly working patients laid on haphazard tables and stacks of crates.
I need blood, a lot of it, and a medic.
Emily called out, shouldering past a few walking wounded who, in her opinion, should not have even been there. One of the lead medical personnel, denoted by her veteran eyes and the burly-looking badge on her shoulder, looked up and to the side, her hands busy with clamping an artery shut in a man's legs.
Medics are all busy and we have no blood to spare. Go away.
Emily looked around quickly and saw a huge cooler full of blood packs, some of which were blue and yellow.
There's plenty of fucking blood right there. Give me that and I'll figure it out. My friend, she's about to die.
Lots of people are about to die.
The woman said, quickly twisting her hemostat forceps as another doctor leaned in with some odd-looking electrical device.
You can either get your friend here or she can die where she lays. We are busy.
The torque spoke inside Emily's mind, and the tone was not one she had heard before, the words thrumming with power.
I don't think so.
Emily didn't feel herself pull the CZ-75 from its holster, but in a flash, the pistol was out with the barrel resting against the woman's temple.
Get that blood.
The torque said into Emily's mind, despite how tired it sounded. Emily set her feet and straightened up fully, cocking back the hammer with enough threat that even the man whose artery was clamped looked nervous.
I said I want blood and a medic.
Emily said fiercely, pressing the gore-laden tip of her CZ-75's barrel against the sweaty flesh of the woman's temple.
Or I will chew through doctors until I can find one who is compliant.
The woman paused, only briefly, patiently turning to look at Emily fully with fierce eyes that peered over the top of her surgical mask. She looked past the barrel into Emily, bright mossy green eyes judging emerald green ones.
You would kill me just to get a few bags of blood? You would damn those who need my help to save only one of your own?
I would kill everyone in this fucking camp if it meant saving my friends.
Emily said, and the words came with such ease that it even surprised her a little bit. The man whose leg was being worked out held up a hand weakly.
I say we give her the blood, maybe.
Emily continued to stare into the eyes of the woman, and she stared back into Emily with her expert, judging glare. Time that can only be measured in the beating of hearts flicked by, each second feeling like minutes, and everyone held their breath around the standoff.
You would, wouldn't you, Emily Browns?
The woman said, her eyes narrowing in the way only a hardened veteran of judging character could. The woman turned towards another medic, his hands poised aimlessly near his chest, having been caught mid-action when Emily drew her pistol.
Mr. Coit, grab 2 bags of O-positive and a bag of Sympaticol, then get her friend stabilized. When you're done, come back here. They can take care of the rest.
Without further word, she returned back to her patient, completely ignoring the gun barrel still trained to the side of her skull.
Good day, Miss Browns.
Emily swallowed stiffly, relief flooding into her, and decocked the hammer on her pistol. As she did, everyone seemed to exhale at once, looking at Emily with a mix of respect and absolute terror. Mr. Coit quickly gathered the bags and medical backpack, then nodded to Emily.
All right, let's go then.
Follow me.
Emily said flatly, then turned, taking back off at a jog with Mr. Coit on her heels. They arrived back at where Yoipua lay within minutes, the harpy still shivering and shaking despite the blanket and heating packs that Marill had tucked under her armpits and inside the crotch of her pants. Mr. Coit knelt down on his knees and quickly began unpacking what he needed, looking up at Emily with stern eyes.
You just threatened to kill the highest-ranked combat surgeon in Lower Vegas. You know that, right? She has friends. Mighty powerful ones, too.
I don't care.
Emily said with zero hesitation, leaning over and running her hand over Yoipua's forehead, pushing her bloody hair away.
Hey, little bird, guess who?
Yoipua smiled weakly.
Hey, Emily, back already?
Advanced stages of shock.
Mr. Coit said, already inserting the large gauge transfusion needle into Yoipua's external jugular.
I'm surprised she's still alive after having her leg ripped away.
She's a tough little hoppy, Yoipua.
Marill said dourly, taking the blood bag from Mr. Coit and holding it aloft as he ran through the procedure.
Why are you going for her neck?
I'm not a veterinarian, and I know this is a human-like vein in the neck. Do you know her blood type?
Mr. Coit asked, double-checking the leg tourniquet and then briefly going over the rest of Yoipua's injuries.
A positive.
Marill replied, giving the O+ bag a little wiggle. Emily watched as the crimson fluid traveled down the tube to Yoipua's neck, twisting the hem of her ruined shirt in her hand. She felt useless sitting there, watching, waiting, but didn't know what else to do.
Weak heartbeat.
Mr. Coit said, holding his fingers to the wrist of Yoipua's wing claw and humming in his throat.
Didn't have any stabilizing potions?
All of them broke somehow. May have been when I had to duck to avoid debris.
Marill growled, watching Yoipua intently.
Fucking bottles.
Don't work in plastic or metal. Always has to be glass or crystal.
Mr. Coit murmured in the same annoyed tone, then glared up at the blood bag.
This isn't going fast enough. I'm gonna slip a pressure sleeve over the blood bag.
Emily looked up from where she was petting Yoipua's head to see Marill and Mr. Coit do something odd with the blood bag and what looked like a pressure cuff, but after a few moments, Mr. Coit gave a little blue bulb a soft squeeze.
Why, isn't that dangerous?
Emily said, looking from Marill to Mr. Coit with worry.
She needs as much blood as we can get into her body as fast as possible. At worst, she may get an embolism, and we'll have to prepare for her to go into cardiac arrest. But seeing as to how she is missing most of her leg, that may be the least of her problems.
Mr. Coit said, watching the blood bag drain faster with satisfaction.
After this, we'll switch her onto the sympatical, then to the other blood bag.
The pressure sleeve made quick work of the blood bag, and Emily watched as color slowly came back to Yoipua's skin, or at least the skin that could be seen under the blood, grime, and muck. Sweat dripped off the tip of Emily's nose as she kept watching Yoipua's face, the harpy having closed her eyes just when the transfusion needle had been set into her neck.
She's juicing,
Mr. Coit said, quickly grabbing a pressure bandage and wrapping it around one of the larger lacerations on her stomach, the wound starting to trickle fresh blood now that it was more plentiful in the body. Marill pulled out some other, more advanced bandages and began peeling off their sticky backing, slapping them down onto Yoipua's flesh with the same sound of wet bread hitting a glass window.
Means her heart is catching up. That's a good sign, right?
Only if we patch up all these damn leaks. She get hit by a grenade or something?
Mr. Coit growled, quickly changing out the empty blood bag for the yellow sympatical. Marill handed him a pack of the odd, sticky bandages.
Here, slap these on the heavier ones.
Gecko plasters? I thought this company's plane unanchored months ago.
Mr. Coit said, amused, quickly peeling the backing off and slapping a bandage down onto a dagger cut on Yoipua's hip. Marill nodded.
Yeah, and a damn shame. I was able to get a few boxes from a scalper around a month ago, but these are as finite as they come.
Casually throwing $10,000 worth of medical bandages on a single harpy, threatening to shoot a master surgeon for just a few bags of blood. Must be tight at your company.
Mr. Coit said, turning to look at Marill with the brow raised only a scant inch.
If only we could all be so lucky.
Yoipua?
Emily said in a hushed whisper, running the palm of her hand across the harpy's forehead.
Are you there?
Yoipua's eyes twitched from behind her eyelids, and Emily watched as the yellow sympatical in the line changed back to red. The empty yellow bag was changed out for another blood bag, the faint squeak of the pressure ball barely audible over the din.
Yoipua?
Emily said again, placing her hand on the bandage-covered stomach of the harpy.
Yoipua, I'm here. We're getting blood back into you. Are you still there, girl?
Explosion.
Yoipua said weakly, her eyelids struggling to lift as she looked towards Emily.
Big explosion. Fighting Fishman.
Emily nodded, relief flooding through her.
I got the fish man. He had a fistful of your feathers, you know that?
You put chop in way. Ugh.
Yoipua said, then moaned painfully as she tried to stir.
Fishman. Try to block bomb diver. You put getting away.
That's all I can do.
Mr. Coit said, gesturing to the bag Marill still had, though she had clipped it to her shoulder.
Keep that one. Move her to CCP. I have other duties.
Thank you.
Emily said, but he paused, turning to look at her.
Thank you. Woman, you took me hostage.
Mr. Coit said, flashing her a short grin before ambling down the pile of bodies and jogging back to his little field hospital.
We should probably carry her down there. You can put her on my back.
Marill said, standing up and moving around to Yoipua in order to lift her. She perked up her horsey ears and stopped when Yoipua shook her head weakly, her wing claw grasping feebly at Emily's hand.
Let Emily carry.
Yoipua gasped, finally finding Emily's hand with her wing claw. Emily looked up to Marill, confused.
What? Yoipua, why?
Carry Yoipua like princess.
Yoipua said, this time with a meek smile.
Carry like in any maze.
Marill leaned her head back, giving the bulb on the pressure sleeve a single squeeze.
Yoipua, you cannot be for real right now.
Emily, however, just smiled brightly, laughing sadly as she wiped away the grimy tears of relief from her eyes.
You got it, sugar. Princess carry all the way to a nice soft bed.
Pumph.
Yoipua said with a pained giggle, gasping out a hiss of agony as Emily lifted her up as softly as she could. Emily settled the harpy in her arms and slowly walked down the pile of bodies, Marill keeping tight to her side and making sure the blood bag's lines were slack. As they walked slowly back to the CCP, Emily set her face, looking down into the groggy-looking face of Yoipua.
They aren't gonna die because of me,
Emily thought, looking up at Marill, who looked back down at Emily with a tired but relieved smile.
I'll set this world on fire before any of them die because of me.
She thought again, then gave Yoipua a soft pat on her ruined leg. Targe and Yoipua were out. Emily had enough time to wash herself in the shower and get a new change of clothes, but spent the rest of the day sitting next to Targe and Yoipua, their bodies littered with bandages, tubes, and IV lines. Mile Marker Cola had a good clinic, though it was small enough that once divers and security personnel were stabilized, they were shipped out via truck. Those trucks were headed to the far larger hospitals down in Lower Vegas, then heading back to grab more wounded. The accountants from Cola had already counted up their tally, money flowing into bank accounts and repair orders sent. Over 557 personnel had taken part in the combat, 300 divers and 257 hired security experts. Of that 500 plus, 410 had been wounded in some regard, either lightly or fatally. 212 were dead, while 20 were considered missing, though there were a lot of body parts to sort through still. 8,800 cultists dead were confirmed, many of which were powerful leaders and captains, such as the berserker Emily had brought down herself. Roughly $2 million in gear and artifacts were recovered, the gear dispensed out first to the dead in order to facilitate their burials, and the rest graded and given out as war booty. Despite the amount of harm that had come to the divers, their mood was cheerful, if not outright party-like in nature. They had taken part in the largest skirmish this side of the water purifier, got scars to prove it, and were able to personally say they had fought alongside Emily Brahms. Emily, of course, cared for none of it, even showing her displeasure by punting a golden chalice given to her as war booty almost completely through the door of Targe and Yoipua's hospital room. The chalice was still implanted in the wood, bent and ruined, but still humming with magical energy. Targe was messed up from the melee, but was more or less intact, save for a part of his right ear, a deep gash in his neck, and the required removal of 10 feet of his large intestine. Yoipua was not nearly as lucky. After a small stint in the surgical room, they had cleaned up her stump of a thigh, neatening up the ragged split in her bone and flesh. Her wings had to be reset, and she had lost a few wing claws, but they would heal so she could maybe fly again. The rest of her body was a mess of scars and blade wounds, but at least her face was only marred by a few small scars from shrapnel. Divers came forward to pay Yoipua respect, even though she was asleep from painkillers. They placed booty on her table, near her lamp, in payment for keeping the grenadier diver alive so he could throw his bombs. Emily glared at them from her spot in between Targe and Yoipua's hospital beds, but one diver was brave enough to step forward. A male diver, whose head was still wrapped in bandages, nodded to Emily respectfully, then gestured to the woman beside him.
The cultist you smashed in the face of was gunning for my friend here, as she had 2 C4 bombs clutched in her hands.
I'd set a timer because I expected to be running up to the wall and then chucking this shit over,
she said, pulling some of her blonde hair back behind her ear with a finger.
That asshole saw the numbers and knew if he grabbed me, we'd all go up.
Your friend there used her grenade launcher like a bat and whacked him over the head while screeching.
The male diver said, nodding with a grin to the sleeping Yoipua.
The two were fighting each other all the way up to the C4 going off.
The female diver winced inwardly.
What I didn't know is that the C4 had been magically tampered with. The explosions were way too large for the amount of charge I had prepared. When it was all over, I looked back over my munitions, and sure enough, some kind of potion had spilled on them and soaked into the explosive.
Blew us right the fuck off that wall.
The male diver said, shaking his head as if he could still feel the shock wave.
And took some of the wall with it. I'm sorry to say it, but when I was flying through the air, I saw a piece of the fortification slice through your friend. I couldn't help at all because I was both knocked silly and having to fight the cultists that had survived. By that point, me and Gale were so fucked up that all we could do was limp back to the medics.
Everyone who was awake turned to look at the door when Davin cleared his throat. The visiting divers scooted out of the way, making room for Davin to squeeze by with an armful of food and drinks. Davin nodded to Emily, handing her little packages of food and drinks.
Spam musubi, crab onigiri, and urn brew for the hero. Oh, and I got you some water as well.
Thanks, Davin.
Emily said tiredly, taking the food and unwrapping it immediately.
Any idea on what we're gonna do now?
Davin shrugged, chugging down a mouthful of kalpis.
Nothing to be done about it. We'll have to continue on with just the three of us and leave these two in urgent care.
Marill groaned from the corner, laying groggily on a centaur ground pillow.
Just the three of us? For fuck's sakes, how we gonna manage with just three?
Wait, what do you mean?
The male diver said, looking from Davin to Emily in confusion. Gale rolled her eyes at her friend.
Oscar, she has the time limit, remember?
How do you know that?
Oscar asked, looking at Gale with a raised eyebrow.
Because everyone fucking knows. It's all anyone talks about.
Gale growled back at him, slapping Oscar on the arm. Oscar howled and clutched at his arm as his stitches panged painfully.
Fuck's sakes, Gale.
Emily turned away from the two and their friends as they continued bickering, looking up at Davin after swallowing a large glug of the water.
Can we do it with three, you think?
Nothing to be done about it. Either you go alone, we all go, or no one goes.
Davin replied matter-of-factly, taking a bite out of his own spam musubi. Emily sighed out through her nose, looking over to Yoipua, then over to Tarj.
Can't wait. You said it yourself when you saw those screens. The water's rising. We wait any longer, it's gonna be an underground sea in here.
Then we go.
Davin said with a nod, tossing the rest of his musubi into his mouth. Marill leaned up her head, blowing loose strands of her braid from her lips as she spoke dourly.
Once more into the breach, dear friends. Once more. Or close the wall up with a diver dead.
Oscar looked up, alarmed.
Wait, you're still going to go down there? Just the three of you?
Are you insane? We may have killed most of that horde, but there are still thousands down there just festering around. They'll kill you if it's just the three of you.
Gale said, just as alarmed as Oscar.
You won't even last an hour in the depths. Not now.
Emily looked up at them, taking a bite of her crab onigiri as she placed Tarja's heartbeat sensor back square on his finger.
What are you asking me to do? Demand volunteers amongst the survivors? More than likely we're heading down to our certain deaths. Who in their right mind would be willing to do that with me?
Davin looked to Emily, then over to the divers who were at the door to the room, all of whom looked at each other warily. He said nothing, taking another long drink of his kalpis. He may have said nothing, but the look said enough. Emily leaned back in her chair, chewing thoughtfully before swallowing and gesturing to the divers in the door.
No gold or reward here, no bailouts, no nothing. You said you knew all about what I was doing. Did you?
Emily said, gesturing to the diver Gale. Gale swallowed nervously while picking at the corner of a bandage on her other wrist.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to save the world, right? Go down and fight it out with one of the big bads and find someone's eye?
All that to save the world? Yes. If I don't do this, we're all likely gonna drown or end up living on mountaintops or some other goofy shit.
Emily said shortly, gesturing around her.
And everyone around me is in danger the entire time. Not even my friends are safe.
Emily growled in disgust, more at her situation than at anything else, and looked back at the divers.
How can I ask anyone else to follow me down there? There won't be any riches, any loot, just blood, bodies, and broken hopes of being the one to survive. Hell, I don't even reckon I'll be the one to survive down there. We just have to go.
The divers stared at Emily, their faces blank in thought as they looked from Emily to Yoipua to Targe to Davin quietly eating food, and then to Marill catching a catnap on her pillow. Oscar ran his hand across his face, looking over to Gale, who shrugged her shoulders at him. He turned to Emily, nodding his head curtly.
Right. Sorry, Emily. We'll let you rest with your friends.
It's all right.
Emily said, gesturing with a wrapped Masubi.
If anyone needs me, I'll be right here.
Oscar nodded again and ushered his group out of the doorway, leaving Emily, Davin, and Marill alone in the room with Targe and Yoipua. Emily watched them go, her eyes as tired as her bones. She looked at her watch, then looked up to Davin.
We have about 12 hours before we have to leave.
I know.
Davin nodded, finishing off his drink and tossing it into a nearby trash can.
I think we'll Shanghai a vehicle, though. Get us across the tunnel faster, then leave it for later.
Marill cracked open an eye, swishing her tail as she lounged on the ground pillow.
We really gonna head out there with just the 3 of us? I'm all for that heroic journey shit, but there's a limit between insanity and pure madness.
You don't have to come.
Emily said seriously, looking at Marill with a hard eye.
I wouldn't blame you for staying here.
Marill snorted, rolling her eyes.
Emily, you know I'm not the kind. What kind of Sentai would I be if I just let my friends go off into the dock alone? Besides, Davin's going. Are you?
Emily asked him, unwrapping her other food parcels with exhausted fingers. Davin nodded.
Of course I am. Already came this far and this close to death. What's another inch or two?
If I had a nickel.
Marill said with a chuckle, giving her centaur hips a wiggle while Davin and Emily snorted out with laughter. Emily's laugh trickled to a dull hum in her throat, and she looked at the little grilled onigiri in her hands, twisting it back and forth as she thought.
We're gonna die, aren't we?
Emily said, quietly, raising her head and looking over to Davin and Marill. Marill's lips twisted as she glanced towards Davin, who just calmly swallowed the cheekful of food he had been chewing.
We're going to do our best not to,
Davin said with a reassuring nod, giving Emily a soldierly wink.
All we can do.
Emily was able to sleep, though it was in the chair she was sitting in, set between Targe and Yoipua's bed. She startled awake from a dead, dreamless sleep, lurching forward within the darkened room. Someone had placed a blanket over her and a neck pillow, and Emily pulled the pillow away, blinking in the monitor-lit darkness. The blue and green glow from the screens showed her that Marill was asleep in the room as well, laying prone on the centaur ground pillow and snoring gently. Emily leaned forward, pulling the blanket away from her legs and turning in her chair, observing the monitors. Targe and Yoipua were stable with good blood pressure and strong heartbeats. Though they were still asleep, their bodies suckering on the painkillers and just going into standby as they healed. Davin was nowhere to be found. Emily stood, groaning softly as she felt her knees complain about having to move. She wobbled out into the clinic hallway and looked around bleary-eyed. It must have been during the night hours, and she looked down at her watch.
4 hours till we have to leave. I'll let Marill keep sleeping. She's earned it.
Emily said sourly, sighing and running her hands across her face with rasps of dry palms on skin.
Oh, God.
Emily moaned into her hands, holding her face as she wrangled her thoughts.
I could have stayed a barista.
A chuckle made her drag her hands down, exposing her eyes and letting her see Davin walk around the corner.
Barista as a hero? Who could think of such a thing?
Davin said, holding 2 cups of steaming coffee in his hands. Emily took a cup as Davin offered it, breathing in the smell through her nose.
You sweet man.
Don't say that till you taste it. Takes a lot of creamer to make this stuff taste good,
Davin said, sipping at his own cup. Emily tasted it and had to agree.
Were you able to find a vehicle?
Emily asked, swallowing down the coffee with a grimace, her tongue tasting notes of burnt rubber and coal. Davin nodded.
Found a Bevis coal roller. It's an actual mining truck, really low to the ground. Will let us squeeze through a little further than the others.
Emily leaned back with her free hand on her hip, wincing as her spine crackled like a popcorn bag.
Well, we're doing this thing. May as well get ready.
I already prepared everything.
Davin said with a cheery smile.
All you gotta do is change uniforms and everything else is packed and ready in the coal roller.
Emily looked down at her uniform, then shrugged.
No point in putting on another one. Just gonna get fucked up anyway.
Marill leaned out past the door, her eyes squinting and ears askew in her grogginess.
We going already? May as well.
Emily sighed out, checking her watch again.
What's the harm in a head start?
Emily went back inside the room, checked on Tarj and Yoipua for the last time, then closed the door behind her, setting the alert toggles on the door so a nurse would check on them every hour. Emily, Davin, and Marill calmly walked out the front doors of the main building, the heat slapping them in the face with little regard for their comfort. The mounds of cultist dead were still being bulldozed out of the main area of mile marker Cola, and security personnel walked back and forth along temporary erected catwalks, eyes watching wearily down the tunnel. Divers of all sorts lounged around, waiting for transport or just getting their wind back while cleaning their weapons. The mood Emily felt as she walked slowly away from the main building was an unknown one, a feeling that was alien and clashed within herself. She felt oddly at peace, but at the same time it felt like she was walking towards the gallows, eyeing the tunnel as if it were her swinging rope. What caused her feet to feel even odder was the fact that there were 7 people idling around the coal roller, standing close to each other and talking quietly. As Emily closed the distance, she saw that all of them wore different company patches on their shoulders, and she understood at once that all of them were divers, 2 of which she recognized, Gale and Oscar, though the other 5 she had not yet met.
What is this supposed to be?
Emily asked them flatly, her voice so devoid of emotion that it came out cold and grave. Oscar stepped forward, his thumbs hooked under his plate carrier straps.
Volunteers. All I could muster up, I'm afraid.
Emily furrowed her brows at Oscar, and Gale stepped up beside him.
We asked the divers who were still here, as well as the security personnel. This is all who said yes. We wanted more, but...
Gale trailed away as Emily focused her glare on her, clearing her throat and looking unsuredly to Oscar.
Y'all can't be serious.
Emily said, flatly again, looking at the divers around her.
The chances of survival? Damn near fucking zero.
We know.
A female diver said, her shoulder patch bearing the emblem of the Holland Hellraisers.
That's why we are here, Emily Browns.
Another male diver stepped forward, his shoulder bearing the emblem of the McBride Company.
No one else was brave enough to toss their hat in the ring, so here we are, to make sure you get to the end and back again.
We're either dead in a few years from the floods, or we die trying to protect the world. Either way, it's better this way than just waiting.
A male diver from Planetary Prospectors said, one of the few large Australian outfits. Oscar turned, gesturing towards the small group.
Emily, this is Dale from the Planetary Prospectors, and his wife, Katja, from the Holland Hellraisers.
He gestured towards another woman and 2 other men.
That's Humir from Diver's Ball, then Dexter and Bogart from Appalachia Relics.
Marill perked up her ears when she saw Humir blinking at the woman in shock.
An elf? As a diver? I thought you people couldn't handle the mental stresses.
Most cannot.
Humir said, flicking her raven black hair over her shoulders and resettling her streamlined plate carrier.
I am an outlier, and I couldn't take any more of being Daddy's little treasure.
Emily tuned out the talking and the noise, instead focusing on committing these new faces to memory. Oscar, like before, was a fair-faced man, athletic build, and seemed to take great pride in his brown hair, cut stylishly to make sure his baby blue eyes were visible. Gale was shorter, feisty-looking, much like Emily, though her soft brown eyes and brown hair would have been better in a classroom teaching children than down in the depths. Bogart and Dexter must have been brothers. Both men strong-jawed with piercing gray eyes that hid nothing of their thoughts. Their hair was buzzed short as well, and from their gear and stature must have been prior military. Katja was tall, strong, green-eyed, and proud, dwarfing her husband Dale by almost 4 inches. Dale himself was friendly-faced, contrasting her with hazel eyes, and always had a finger laced somewhere on Katja, whether that was her pocket or a loop on her vest. Humir was something else entirely. Purple red eyes watched Emily closely as the 2 observed each other. The elf's ears were capped in silver, her gray hair cut aggressively, but there was something regal about the woman, as if she may have been something far more before becoming a diver.
I don't want you guys to come with us.
Emily said, her voice cutting through the idle chatter.
You don't have to do this.
We know.
Oscar said with a smile, then turned to look at his watch.
We ought to get going. We're on a schedule, aren't we?
Humir nodded, turning and looking down the long tunnel path.
Can't leave fate waiting now, can we? She tends to get quite cross with dilly-dally and hesitation.
Oscar turned away from Emily, still smiling, and the rest of the divers nodded to her, turning with Oscar and clambering up onto the coal roller. Emily watched them climb up into the long, squat vehicle, and she felt her throat once again go dry.
We should be thankful they're coming, Emily.
Marill said, stepping up beside Emily and placing her large hand on her shoulder.
Though, it's a shame that out of all the people here, only 7 were brave enough to step forward.
Davin nodded, placing a toothpick in between his teeth.
If anything, they will provide an excellent distraction.
Emily looked up at him ruefully, glaring at him.
We're not tossing anyone away. They get treated the same as Tarj or Yopua. We're all coming home. We have to plan on all of us coming home.
As you wish,
Davin said in a hushed whisper and stepped forward towards the driver's seat of the coal roller.